Where legends breathe again. Eldmyth. The desert wind whispers across the endless sea of sand, carrying with it the ghosts of a civilization that once believed the sun was born each morning from a lotus flower. Beneath the relentless gaze of a burning, white-hot sun, the very air shimmers with ancient secrets. We are in the land of the Nile, a ribbon of life cutting through a vast, arid death, where the line between the world of the living and the realm of the gods was as thin as papyrus. Here, in this cradle of civilization, myths were not mere stories. They were explanations for the rising of the river, the heat of the day, and the terrifying, necessary fury of nature. And no deity embodied that terrifying, necessary fury more completely than Sekhmet, the lioness goddess. She was the hot breath of the desert, the punishing heat of the sun, and the swift, merciless hand of divine retribution. To understand her is to understand the delicate, terrifying balance the Egyptians saw in the universe, the balance between life-giving order and life-devouring chaos, between the healing touch of a physician and the plague that decimates a nation. She was the Eye of Ra, the protector and the destroyer, a being of such immense power that even the other gods approached her with a mixture of awe and dread. To comprehend the duality of Sekhmet, one must first journey to the very beginning of her story, a tale born from the rage of a sun god. The supreme deity Ra, the creator and sustainer of all, had grown old. He looked upon the humanity he had fashioned from his tears and saw not reverence, but insolence. Mankind plotted against him, whispering in dark corners, challenging the authority of the one who gave them life. This betrayal festered in Ra's heart, and from his divine fury a new entity was born. It was not a gentle creation. It was a manifestation of pure, unadulterated vengeance. From his eye, the Ujat Eye, a being of terrifying power, emerged. She was a lioness, larger than any natural beast, her skin red as the blood she would soon spill, her breath the scorching heat of the desert wind. This was Sekhmet, the powerful one. Her sole purpose was to punish humanity for its arrogance. She descended upon the earth not as a goddess, but as a force of nature, a divine plague. Her roar shattered the silence of the villages, and her claws tore through flesh and bone with effortless grace. She did not merely kill, she devoured, her fury so absolute that the Nile itself was said to run red, not with soil, but with the lifeblood of those who had dared defy the heavens. The slaughter was immense, a symphony of terror that echoed across the two lands. Yet, as Ra watched from his solar bark, a strange emotion stirred within him, not regret for the punishment, but a fear of its ultimate conclusion. Sekhmet, drunk on the intoxicating taste of blood and the ecstasy of her purpose, showed no sign of stopping. Her mission of punishment was transforming into a campaign of annihilation. She would not rest until every last human was a broken corpse at her feet, and the world was silent. Ra realized that his instrument of justice would become the instrument of creation's end. The order of Ma'at would be shattered not by humanity's rebellion, but by a goddess's insatiable hunger. He had unleashed a power he could not control. A desperate council was held among the gods. They could not fight her directly, for her power was a part of Ra himself. They had to outwit her, to quench her thirst with something other than blood. And so, the god of wisdom, Thoth, in concert with the other deities, devised a cunning and desperate plan. A plan that involved not weapons of war, but the simple, earthly magic of beer. The plan was set in motion with divine haste. The priests of Ra, acting on the god's command, gathered 7,000 jars of beer. But this was no ordinary brew. Into the potent, golden liquid, they stirred a magical substance, ochre or pomegranate juice, depending on the telling of the tale, that turned the beer a deep, bloody crimson. This concoction was not created in the temples, but directly in the path of Sekhmet's rampage, poured out in great lakes across the fields of Dendera, where the goddess was expected to continue her slaughter. As dawn broke, Sekhmet arrived, her muzzle still caked with the evidence of her night's work. She saw the vast, shimmering lake of red liquid, and believing it to be a vast pool of human blood, let out a roar of triumph. She did not pause to question her fortune. She bent her head and began to drink, her thirst immense and unquenchable. She lapped at the liquid, gulping down the intoxicating brew until the entire lake began to shrink. The earth drank what she spilled, and she drank the rest, her divine metabolism processing the alcohol at a terrifying rate. The effect was not immediate, but as the sun climbed higher, the lioness's movements began to slow. The fierce light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a glossy, unfocused sheen. The relentless drive to kill was muddled by a sudden, overwhelming dizziness. Her powerful legs wobbled and her ferocious roars became confused, sleepy growls. The bloodbeer, a divine trick, had done its work. Sekhmet, the ultimate destroyer, had fallen into a deep, drunken stupor. She slept for 3 days, and when she finally awoke, the blinding rage that had consumed her was gone. The thirst for vengeance had been sated, not by blood but by the very essence of celebration and forgetfulness. She rose, not as the terrifying avenger of Ra, but as a gentler, benevolent goddess. In some versions of the myth, she was so transformed by the experience that she became a different deity entirely. Hathor, the goddess of love, music, and beauty. This was her dual nature, forever intertwined. She was the storm and the calm after the storm, a reminder that from the brink of total destruction, life and joy can emerge anew, but only if wisdom intervenes upon wrath. This foundational myth established Sekhmet's primary role as a goddess who could bring both pestilence and its cure. The Egyptians lived in a world where a single plague could wipe out a city, where the hot wind from the desert could bring sickness. They saw this not as a random act of nature, but as the breath of Sekhmet. To appease her and avert her wrath, they developed elaborate rituals and ceremonies. Her priests were not just religious functionaries. They were also physicians, the first doctors, who wielded both magical incantations and practical medical knowledge. In their temples, statues of the goddess were believed to be vessels for her potent energy. During the great festivals, particularly on the 5 epagonal days at the end of the year, days considered dangerous and outside of normal time, her priests would perform the ritual of appeasing Sekhmet. They would chant powerful hymns, reciting every one of her names and epithets to flatter and calm her. They would offer her the finest foods, red cloth, and intoxicating drink, a direct reference to the myth of her pacification, hoping to preemptively quell her fury before it could be unleashed upon the land. The tools of these priest-physicians were inscribed with Sekhmet's image and her powerful words. A simple bandage used to wrap a wound might have a spell invoking her healing aspect. They understood that the same power that could break a body could also mend it. This was the essence of sympathetic magic and divine intercession. The incantations spoken over the sick often called upon Sekhmet to send her messengers, the demons of disease, back to the underworld to recall the plague she had unleashed. People wore amulets bearing her likeness not only for protection in battle, but also as a safeguard against fever and infection. In every household, a small prayer to the Lady of Pestilence might be whispered at dusk, a plea for a healthy family and a peaceful night, safe from the unseen dangers that walked in the darkness. The fear of her was ever present, a spiritual hygiene that governed daily life, a constant reminder that health was a gift from the gods, and specifically, a state of grace granted by a pacified Sekhmet. Beyond her role in medicine and wrath, Sekhmet was also a formidable protector in the realm of war and the afterlife. Pharaohs, who were seen as living gods, adopted her ferocity as their own in battle. They were often described as being like Sekhmet in the moment of her rage, when they charged into combat, striking terror into the hearts of Egypt's enemies. Her name was a war cry, her image painted on the shields of soldiers, and her story a metaphor for the pharaoh's righteous, overwhelming power. In the Book of the Dead, the collection of spells designed to guide the soul through the perils of the Jewat, or the underworld, Sekhmet appears as one of the fierce guardians who defend the solar bark of Ra as it travels through the 12 hours of the night. This journey was fraught with danger, from the serpent Apophis who sought to devour the sun and end creation, to legions of demons. Sekhmet, with her fiery breath and sharp spears, stood as a sentinel against these forces of chaos. the deceased would recite spells to identify with her power, hoping to pass safely by these divine guardians and be reborn with the sun at dawn. One of the most poignant legends surrounding Sekhmet involves her connection to the annual flooding of the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt. The inundation was both a blessing and a potential catastrophe. Too little water meant famine, too much meant destructive floods. The Egyptians believed the flood was caused by the tears of Isis mourning her husband Osiris, but they also linked it to Sekhmet. The fierce heat of the summer which preceded the flood was her burning breath, punishing the land. The eventual rising of the river, red with fertile silt from the highlands, was symbolically linked to the blood-red beer that pacified her. The flood was thus a divine cooling of her anger, the transformation of her destructive power into a creative, life-sustaining force. This annual cycle of heat, flood, and renewal was a national reenactment of her great myth. It was a tangible, yearly reminder that the gods were not distant, but intimately involved in the fate of the land, and that the balance between their wrath and their mercy dictated the survival of millions. The worship of Sekhmet was not confined to a single city, but one of her most significant cult centers was in Memphis, where she formed part of a powerful triad with her husband, Ptah, the god of craftsmen and creation, and their son, Nefertum, the god of the lotus and perfume. This family dynamic is fascinating in its contradictions. Ptah was a calm, chthonic deity, a planner and a maker, associated with the stability of the earth. Nefertum was a god of beauty and sweet-smelling things, emerging from the primal lotus at the dawn of creation. Sekhmet, the chaotic, destructive force, was the wife and mother in this divine family. This triad symbolized a complete cosmic cycle. Ptah was the potential for creation, Sekhmet was the power to enact and defend it, and Nefertum was the beautiful, finished result. It was a theological statement that destruction and chaos were not separate from creation and order, but were necessary components of it. A temple without Sekhmet's protective fury would be vulnerable. A creation without the power to destroy its enemies would be short-lived. As we move from the dusty scrolls of antiquity into the modern era, the image of Sekhmet has lost none of its power. She has been adopted and reinterpreted by new generations, finding a home in neo-paganism, fantasy literature, and video games. She is often held up as a symbol of fierce feminine power, a goddess who is not defined by motherhood or passivity, but by her raw, untamed strength. Modern practitioners of Kemetic paganism perform rituals to honor her, seeking her protection and her healing power, while respectfully acknowledging her dangerous aspects. In popular culture, she appears as a powerful character in games like Smite or the Age of Mythology, where her in-game abilities perfectly capture her dual nature, able to inflict plague and then heal allies. She represents an archetype that still resonates, the powerful woman who is not to be trifled with, the protector who will unleash hell upon those who threaten what she holds dear. She is a reminder that the divine feminine is not solely about nurturing, but also about the righteous fury that safeguards the innocent. Yet, perhaps the most enduring legacy of Sekhmet is not in any single story or statue, but in the profound philosophical concept she embodies. She is the walking, roaring embodiment of the principle that life cannot exist without the potential for death, that health is defined by its contrast to sickness, and that order is perpetually threatened by chaos. The Egyptians did not see the world in simple binaries of good and evil. They saw a universe in precarious balance, a scale that required constant vigilance and correct action, Mot to maintain. Sekhmet was the weight on one side of that scale. To ignore her was to invite catastrophe. To acknowledge and appease her was to harness her power for protection and healing. She was the necessary shadow, the savage mother, who could both give life and take it away with the same breath. In a world that often seeks to sanitize and simplify the complexities of existence, Sekhmet stands as an ancient, formidable reminder of the raw, untamed, and dualistic nature of reality itself. So, as the sun sets over the sands that have buried so many kingdoms, the echo of Sekhmet's roar can still be felt. It is in the sudden silence before a storm, in the fever that breaks a sickness, and in the fierce, protective love that defends the vulnerable. She is more than a myth. She is a fundamental archetype of power in its most raw and necessary form. She challenges us to acknowledge the destructive potential within our own world and within ourselves, and to seek the wisdom to transform that potential into protection, healing, and ultimately, into a force for life. The story of the blood-red beer is not just a quaint tale from the past. It is a perpetual lesson. It teaches us that rage, left unchecked, can consume everything. But that same fierce power, when guided by wisdom and compassion, can become the very foundation of peace and renewal. And so, the powerful one endures, not as a relic, but as a timeless whisper on the wind, a lesson in stone and sand waiting to be remembered. Another legend fades, but the next awaits. Like this video, subscribe and continue the journey through myths.